So you're experiencing symptoms like leaking and prolapse. You might have a tight pelvic floor. So a lot of people think that leaking and prolapse is a result of a weak pelvic floor, but there's actually more research that shows more women suffer from a tight pelvic floor versus one that is completely weak. Now, the reason why pelvic floors tighten is generally because they're trying to compensate for weakness in other areas of the body, like weak abdominals, weak glutes. So that pelvic floor starts to tense because it thinks like, oh my gosh, I have to make up for all the work that nobody else is doing, and it stays in that contracted position all the time. Well, think of it this way. If you're somebody, or if you think of like jaw clenching, if you contract and you press down all the time, what happens? You end up with pain, you end up with issues with your neck, and oftentimes a lot of stiffness, and you have a hard time like fully, opening your jaw completely. It's the same thing with the pelvic floor. In order to strengthen muscles, they need the opportunity to relax so they can fully lengthen and then fully contract. If they're constantly in this position where they're holding on for dear life, there's no way to strengthen in that sort of situation. So we need to be able to relax the pelvic floor. So I'm going to give you some examples of how to go about it. If you're still experiencing symptoms and you're not sure, it's always great to visit a pelvic floor PT so they can actually do an internal examination and get a better idea of what's really going on, especially if you're experiencing extreme symptoms like prolapse. It's knowledge is power, so the more you know, it kind of helps the people you're working with, like myself, come up with a plan of action. Now, remember that everything's connected. So it's not the pelvic floor's fault if it's, in a tight situation. Again, it's compensating for the fact that other parts of your body are not working. Now, the reason why those other parts, the abdominals aren't working, the glutes aren't working, can happen for a number of reasons. Obviously, pregnant women experience it a lot because their abdominals, generally have mostly shut off during pregnancy because they got stretched out, they weren't using them as much, their posture changed, so they had that kind of forward hip posture to kind of compensate for that weight and how it's, where it's at. So their glutes started, they started to become glute grippers. Things like just being out of shape in general, being sedentary, which, let's be honest, our society is very sedentary, and that just leads to weakness. And things then also like back pain. When you experience any sort of back pain, a lot of times your abdominals shut off because it's like, they're scared. They get scared, and so your brain is like, nope, we're not firing them because we don't even want to risk feeling any sort of pain. It's just really interesting how your brain and your nerve system tries to compensate when pain is involved. So there's a number of reasons why you might be experiencing that pelvic floor tightness. It's important to identify why your pelvic floor is tight. It's not just because it's the pelvic floor and there's nothing else related to it. Your pelvic floor is tight because of other things. Now, we can release it all day, but if we don't understand why your pelvic floor became tight, it's, we're fixing the symptom, but not the problem. So you're probably going to end up back in the same position. But it's great to learn and understand how to release, but you also, I highly recommend, should work with a women's health PT or a women's health specialist like myself to come up with a plan to help identify why your pelvic floor is tight. So let's talk about some ways to release the pelvic floor. All right, so you're gonna want some different balls. I recommend, if this is the first time you're doing it, you're gonna wanna start lighter, or something that's softer. This is just kind of one of those soft, weighted balls. It's kind of got some sand in it. A tennis ball would be a good option potentially because it's soft, but it's a little bit smaller. They have some, of those massage balls or release balls that you can use. And then I have a lacrosse ball. The lacrosse ball for this particular thing we're doing is going to be the most extreme. I don't recommend starting with this because it might be somewhat painful, very uncomfortable. So ease your way into it, okay? So what you're going to do is sit yourself up in a chair, okay? And you're going to find those sit bones, which is the bony part of your butt, okay? You're going to identify where those sit bones are. You're going to take your ball, okay? And I'm going to start with the larger one just to demonstrate. And again, start softer and work your way up. And you're going to find the sit bones, and then you're going to place the ball right inside of the sit bones. okay? And you're just gonna kind of roll forward and back a little bit. And if you find a spot that's particularly uncomfortable, hold on there for a second and allow those muscles to release. It's like that pressure point initially, it's like, ooh, but it just needs a second to relax, just like if you get massages. So if you find those points that are like particularly tender, take a little extra time there and just kind of move forward, hold for 10 seconds in a spot, and then maybe move back and just kind of massage out that pelvic floor, just forward and back. And then make sure you do both sides and pay attention. Do you notice one side is more tender than the other? Okay, that's a sign that there's an imbalance going on there, and maybe there's something going on with your external rotators, like those glute muscles, that they're not firing equally, so it's affecting your pelvic floor. So maybe one side of your pelvic floor is tight and the other side isn't so much. It's amazing what the body will do to compensate. It will adapt in all situations, and that's great for survival, but we don't need our body to constantly be in this survival situation. So we need to give it opportunities to function at its best. So, do that with the softer ball. If you're like, oh, that felt fine, I didn't really notice, it wasn't overly tender, I think I can move up, try it with the other ball. Again, find the bony part of your butt, place the ball inside of that sit bone. And you can play with, if your feet are grounded, play with the amount of weight you put on it. You want a decent amount of body weight on there, but if it's a little too tender, you can always use your arms and kind of lift yourself off just a little bit and control the amount of weight you're putting on it. So give that a try. And notice then afterwards if you notice that it helped release. And I'll be posting some other exercises and things you can do to help release that pelvic floor as well.